5 p.m. news update. It's time for the big hard fact, and we're diving deep into one important issue. And today, the federal budget that was passed last week and approved a budget of 10.57 trillion naira. That's the Nigerian Senate. Today's big hard fact is that the budget approved by the Senate earmarks more money for debt servicing, that's 2.72 trillion naira, than for capital expenditure, that's 2.4 trillion naira. And it also adds 2.28 trillion naira in deficit spending. So basically, more federal government money is going into paying old debts than going into new or existing projects. And in spite of this, we're borrowing more to fund the new budget, Aghogho.
Yeah, the Senate also is, maintain Nigeria's daily oil production rate at 2.18 million barrels per day, but then it's increased the oil benchmark price to $57 per barrel against the $55 proposed by the executive. I'm hoping, well, someone was joking the other day and said, going by what is going on with the border wahala, we'll probably be benchmarking our budget very soon to the cost price per 50 kilograms bag of rice. If we get to a level where sustainably we're producing enough rice to say that's even more than how much you get for a barrel of crude oil. But we have discussants on the show today, both of them economic and financial background. Lester Wilcox, chartered accountant, and Fred Nzeko is a lawyer and also, importantly, economist and management consultant. So,
yeah, we're also expecting Ojugo from Budget to join us in conversations today. One of the areas that we want to look at today is the sustainability of our funding model for these budgets going forward. As usual, you are our most important guest. We're talking about you who's listening at home or in your car or in your office. And we want you to call us. We want you to talk about the questions you have with our guests and also about the budget itself, the budget process. What questions do you have in those areas? How have federal budgets affected you, impacted you? Are there any projects that you've seen in the federal budget that have actually materialized and improved your life? What would you like to see the government use your money to achieve? Barrister Nzeko, the Senate President Ahmed Lawan has said that he wants the budget passed before the end of the year so that the federal government can return to a January to December budget cycle. Can you explain what this means and why this is important before we move ahead?
It is important that we return to the budget cycle of January to December because that has been the practice, and then in most other advanced countries of the world, that is the practice. And then Nigeria is not a pariah nation. It is not an island unto itself. Businesses are done with and among countries. We have bilateral and bilateral relationships with some other countries. And then if we don't make our budget cycle to conform with what goes on in the rest of the world, we'll be having discussions of time in implementation of most of the things that we do, especially the foreign content aspect of our budget. And of course, you can agree with me that the foreign aspect content of our economic activities in Nigeria is so high that we need to bring everything in line with international best practices. So it's a function of bringing it in line with international best practices. So we'll conform with the rest of the world.
I wonder if Mr. Wilcox agrees with you.
Oh, sure. To a very, very large extent, I think I agree with my brother Fred. Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I agree with my brother Fred that it has been the convention that our budget runs from. Our fiscal year is January to December. That has been our fiscal year. Every country have their fiscal year. Some run from April to May to March. Some runs from October to September. Some runs from July to June. So every institution, companies, countries have their budget cycle or their fiscal year cycle. The unfortunate thing happened in Nigeria was that the aberration that are taking place since our return to democratic governance, whereby budgets are not passed on time by National Assembly. The last being the 2019 budget that took almost 6 months to be passed, and at that point there's nothing much done. And when this overlap comes in, when this distortion and overlap comes in, it becomes difficult to track really what are the contents of the previous year budget, what are the contents of the new year budget. We see that some part of it were all over. So accountability becomes a challenge, and then monitoring by by civil society, by the press, and by the people becomes also a challenge. So now that the government has worked very hard with the help of National Assembly to align our budget, I think it's a work and woman. We all should applaud it.
Mr. Zeko.
Yes.
Okay, I'd like, if any of you's got the radio on, because we were getting interference, to kindly switch off or move away from the radio you're listening to. So let me come to you, Mr. Nzako, on this one. If you had asked Ahmed Lawan when he was sworn in as the president of the Senate, what will be his greatest achievement if he became president of the Senate, will be with the Ninth Assembly. They would achieve a January to December schedule for the budget, and appeared to be the number one thing on his mind when he announced this is what had happened. But going forward, I've had a number of comments from people, for example, in budget, who said that certain things in the budget did not go through the usual scrutiny should have gone through if they had all the MDAs appear before the various subcommittees, just to say we are able to achieve a January to December schedule and then miss out on some important aspect of the budget. You think the pressure to achieve this going by just 2 months, this was submitted before the Assembly and they did this, will make this a rush work, or something that you think intensive work was done on?
Much as it is good to go back to the budget cycle, a lot of assemblies in the past had wanted to go back to that January to December cycle, and they have not been able to do that. For some logistics and administrative reasons that bedevil their operations in the National Assembly. So if something had to give, for them to be able to achieve that, they had to do an intensive work, and of course I agree with you, rush over some aspects of the budget content. But rushing over them is not the harm. Where I have issues is in implementation. Implementation of the budget has always been a cardinal problem in the Nigerian budgetary system. Most times they will tell you that it is between 40 and 50% at most implementation. And then what it now means is that even if they achieve the 50% benchmark of implementation, we can now leverage on that and build for the future. So I do not think that they are rushing. It can be described as rushing by some people, but described as hard work and putting more time by the people in the national, by the legislators in the National Assembly who had to do that work on the budget. And meanwhile, what is also important is that there is a congruency of opinion between National Assembly and the executive in terms of what and what should appear on the budget. And then we're going forward, like I earlier said, now begin to look at the issue of implementation. The higher the level and percentage of implementation, the better for our economic calculus. And what we should be asking the executive to do this time is that it is their budget. They took it to National Assembly. The only thing the National Assembly did was to adjust some headings and then increase the quantum by $200-something billion naira, just 3.9 billion precisely. That shouldn't hurt the budget, so to speak. The last year's budget was 8.something trillion. Now we have moved to 10.59 trillion. Even that last year's budget was less than 50% implemented. And now we are moving into, what I mean by 2019 budget. And now we are moving to 2020 budget with 10.59 trillion. And with a very huge deficit inbuilt already in the system. Now, what is important, like I earlier said, is that government should, as much as possible, try to achieve higher percentage of budget implementation. And then that cannot be achieved if there is no sincerity of purpose. That cannot be achieved if there is no honesty in discharging responsibilities by the MDAs that are started with responsibilities of discharging the contents of the budget. So the government owes that as a responsibility, as a duty to Nigerians to implement this budget. Nobody should begin to say it was not perfectly assessed. Nothing is perfect in human existence, but at least we are trying to achieve some level and percentage of a very good implementation. If we can push that up to 65%, I tell you that we will be doing very good. And another worrisome aspect of the budget, which I'm sure that we will look into, is the quantum and the amount of recurrent outlay. Yet again, the recurrent outlay is so huge. When you are looking at a budget of 10.59 trillion, and the recurrent is almost over 40% of that at 4.84 trillion. That is a lot. It doesn't mean that the rest is for capital, because the capital content of it is very low, 2.46 trillion. So we are still hovering around that low level. We are still hovering around that low ladder. We have been asking that there has to be a paradigm shift in the budget proposal and implementation, where at least let us begin to try to look at 50-50%, and then over time the capital expenditure should overtake and surpass the recurrent expenses. But as we speak, the capital expenditure content of the budget is almost half of that of recurrent. Whereas a large chunk of the money that is even higher than the capital outlay is going for debt servicing. 2.72 trillion for debt servicing as against 2.46 trillion for capital expenditure. So that means that the money we are going to spend in servicing and our debt is higher than what the entire country will inject at the federal level in capital projects. And it does not go well towards economic development of the country.
All right.
Meanwhile, the rest now goes into the current, which is servicing the overbloated bureaucracy. So that is the worry of many economists and accountants and many policy watchers in the Nigerian system, that we have not really had a paradigm shift at all.
Okay, so we've just had join us on the show the head of research at Budget NG, Aghogho. Thank you so much for joining us on Hard Facts.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so you've had the tail end of that conversation where Barrister Zaka was talking about the deficit, right? Basically, the federal government is planning to spend more in 2020 than it is expecting to make. Deficit spending in itself is not a bad thing, right? A lot of nations run deficits. Now, under what conditions is deficit spending acceptable, Aghogho, and under what conditions is it dangerous?
Yeah, so I think here too we can also reference the Fiscal Responsibility Act of the Nigerian government, where it is quite explicit that that borrowing to be taken for capital expenditure, right? So I think that's the key thing that is already mentioned and enshrined. So if for any instance there is a situation where we are not meeting our revenue projections, and as such we are not able to meet the current expenditure, there is a legal ban against us actually using money that is borrowed, right? Money which, so right now the budget deficit is going to be financed by borrowing. There is a legal based on that act, we are not allowed to actually spend money that is that is borrowed to fund recurring expenditure. So I think that's one key one definitely that we should be aware of.
Let me come to you, Mr. Wilcox, on this one. We've had on several fora the Minister of Finance or government representatives argue that we don't have a debt problem. Rather, what we have is a revenue problem. In pushing forward its argument on the huge percentage of the budget, but they would argue many times in terms of the monies being put out, we will have to service the debts. What is your thinking around this one as we look at even the 10.3 trillion naira realistically is also being threatened by this sort of argument? We may not even get the entire amount.
Well, thank you very much. I want to make one point a bit clear. You see, because our budget has always had an overlap, we discovered that over time the budget size keeps increasing, but in actual fact, it is not. There are mainly no new additions to the budget. It is the things that were not done in the previous budget that most civil servants will read over. A typical example is the fact that a department asked for 5 computers, and that 5 computers could not be given, or they could not even get one in that budget, in that year budget. So everything is being replicated in the next year budget. because they've not gotten it. So most of them are not. The additions, where these figures keep going on, the additions are just minimal. It's just because of accumulated. I'm not in government, but I'm just thinking aloud, which I know happens in budget cycle. Accumulations of on service items, expense items that are always increasing to start the budget. So it doesn't scare me when I hear the size of budget increasing from 8 to 10 trillion. Most of them are replications, and so that's why we don't see much happening. In terms of back to your question, yes, we have always canvassed that issue. Nigeria has the debt issue in Nigeria. If you compare debt to GDP, we're still within international accepted limits. In fact, we're doing better than most other countries if you compare debt to GDP. But the problem we have is debt to income, debt to revenue. Our revenue-based profile is too low. And the unfortunate thing is, when most economists talk, they want government to provide every facility, but they don't want government to raise revenue, which for me is hypocrisy. The recent angles government is doing in order to show up revenues, especially at the federal level, and people have been resisting it. So, for instance, this VAT increase, people have been resisting it. Meanwhile, you want government to provide services, you want government to provide this, to provide that. Government does not print money. There's no way in the world government prints money. Government resources comes from taxes and other businesses, just like any other private man does. So if we show up our revenue base, when we compare ourselves to South Africa, South African budget is this and that. Yes, if you know the national revenue base, you'll be marveled. You know, everybody is captured most people. The capturing of people in the tax bracket is almost at 80%, while Nigeria is lower than even 50%. So, and then if you take VAT, for instance, VAT in South Africa is about 17.5%, and we are charging 5%. So,
but ideally speaking, if we have the revenue performance higher than, say, for example, 60%, which has never ever happened, it means that then the debt payment wouldn't be an issue. But since we're not able to achieve even 60% of the planned revenue every other year, it means that 2.72 trillion naira for debt servicing will hurt us eventually.
No, it will hurt us because as much as we cannot service all, because let's also face, like I said, the more as your poverty is performing at 40% or 50%, it is a totality. Fine, you will say the recurrent, because recurrent has to do with services, especially salaries of federal workers, armed forces, maintenance of government services and all whatnot. That gets up to 80% performance. Capital expenditure, which is the one that, like everybody says, touch everybody, that one suffers. And also debt servicing, because you cannot service all that you budget for debt. You cannot, because you don't meet the revenue profile. So you still roll over part of the ones you didn't service to the next. So it will still happening. And the only way out is the fact that when we stop borrowing, which for now may be difficult because our infrastructural deficit is widened by the day, and so the aspect of borrowing will still, and then it is also aspect of sharing up our revenue base. If we capture more people in the tax bracket, make people pay their taxes and when due, then you discover that over time, it will be a day thing. It will not wipe up in one day, but over time, revenue will keep building up. Then government will have more money to establish their debt, pay off their debt, and then begin to work on a clean slate. So, but if we choose not to go the route of taking the pain, taking the bullet now for future generation in terms of our restructuring our revenue base and making our revenue base broader, then they were not started. And again, I must say this. Let's also not forget that whatever revenue that is accrued to the government is shared. It's shared by the 3 tiers of government. And so when we are talking about budget, sincerely, I keep telling us, let us hammer on the state. The states will lead them to run riots and will keep depending on the government. Everyone is saying that the federal government will do all that they... No! The federal government has their responsibilities. And the responsibilities are different from the state. So if I want something to touch, if I want a direct impact of budget on me, as an individual, then I should be looking at what's happening at my local government, because federal budget may not touch me. If I don't apply federal roads, if I don't go to federal university, if I don't go to federal hospital, except maybe the armed forces and the people that protect me, but directly will not touch me. But if I need something to touch me directly, like the road that leads to my house, the road that leads to my village, then I should hold the state government, because they also share part of the revenue that comes accrued to the state, to the treasury.
Ojigo, do you believe the federal government's budget meets the requirements for safe deficit spending?
The question.
Ojigo,
Yes, hello.
do you believe the federal government's budget meets the requirements for safe deficit spending?
What someone has already mentioned during the conversation. Right now, I do not. Why? Because of this.
Ojigo, your line
Yes.
isn't very clear. Hello? Hello, Ojigo.
Hello? Yes, so I was saying that right now, no, it does not.
Okay.
And that is because, as someone has mentioned, that is because of the debt, the debt servicing to revenue ratio. Which is currently quite abysmal. So, and that has repeatedly risen, right? It was previously something like 20.4% in 2011, and as of June 2019, that's the pro rata measure this year, it was 54.4%. So right now it does not, because in terms of, again, you can't, at least in Nigeria, you can't separate the debt servicing question from the revenue issue. And it is great to see that the government has made more aggressive targets, right, for revenue, especially in terms of independent revenue, in terms of non-oil revenue. However, the question is, the structural changes that have been made, right, or the structural, when you talk to government persons, there are structural changes that have been made that are in the process of being made, so that you can actually get increase in this independent revenue, increase in non-oil revenue. But the question is, will they bear fruit now? Because again, if they do not, let's remember that when you have if a budget is not realistic in its revenue items, what that means is that ultimately some things will be deprioritized. And there becomes the question of, is there a clear sense of what is going to be prioritized first before the second? I don't believe 60-something% budget performance, as someone has mentioned, I don't believe that is adequate. Right, we should be. That is highly inadequate. So for me, it's also a question. I think in Nigeria and I think elsewhere, right, the question is, we need, on the one hand, we need to be more realistic in our budgeting, so that you can have a situation where you're actually spending what you should on capital expenditure and the needed investment. However, you also have to create aggressive targets for agencies so that they are not relaxed. Right? So there's this pool, this kind of philosophical back and forth. But we have to, in a way, if it even means having several scenarios, right, where we understand that if certain revenue targets are not met, what is the cost? What is going to be what is going to have to be deprioritized? So I hope that answers your question.
All right, Barrister Nzako, I have to ask. We've seen large discrepancies between expected revenue and actual revenue year after year. And we've seen that these large discrepancies are in all royalties. Basically, we tend to overestimate how much oil we're going to produce every year, and therefore how much we're going to make in royalties. Why should this be happening when the oil companies themselves have their projections which we can use, and the government should also be able to perform audits on the production capacity of the sector every year?
Sometimes, in the opinion of some government officials, they usually feel that the bigger the budget is an indication that the government is doing well.
I see.
And that is why they will continue to increase the numerical amount in the budget, irrespective of the realistic realizables. Because if government works with realistic realizables, we cannot be looking at this type of amount. But that doesn't mean that is the best Nigeria can do. It's a reflection of the fact that the huge leakages in our system is a very major cause. Second cause is a lot of factors that are yet to be deployed, and that is why Nigeria has a lot of potentials that are not exploited and tapped. And then if those potentials are not exploited and tapped, it will not translate to increase in our general revenue. But it's important for us to know that much as it is good for government to increase its revenue, especially according to my friend Alessa, by way of taxation, yes. But it's also more critical that government should increase the disposable income in the hands of the people, because income in economics is equal to savings, and it is that IS balance that translates to investment, which will now translate to more payment of taxation, or more payment of taxes to government. If the people are impoverished and pauperized, there's no way they can pay the necessary taxes that is required from government. The second thing that is important is that for government to have large amount of money at its disposal, government will not only show up its revenue, it must work towards reducing its costs and expenses. We see government trying to increase revenue by all manner of taxation on the people. VAT is increased, stamp duty, this, that, all of them. Now, is government correspondingly reducing its expenses? And the answer is no. If government makes similar effort to reduce its expenses, now the quantum of money at disposal of government to fix into realization of our budget proposals will increase. And that way, it will continue to drastically reduce the deficit in our budget. At the level where we are running today, when over 290 something MDAs that were recommended by the Rosoye Committee that they should be scrapped, government is still carrying all of them on, even though government is claiming that scrapping them will affect the labor balance in the system, but we don't agree so, because what is important is efficient labor needs to be put in the system. If the labor is not efficient, the number of inefficiency, when it increases, it becomes a huge burden on the finances of government. And it's also important for us to know that much as federal government will have to work hard. Yes, I agree with Alessa that the states themselves will complement what is done at the federal level. But to whom much is given, much is desired. Federal government takes the largest chunk of money from our federation account, 51%, and the state and local government share about between 48 and 49%. So federal government alone takes the larger chunk, and then delivering the rest to the federative state. And meanwhile, most of the facilities, most of the natural resources at the federative state belong to federal government because of the pseudo-unitary quasi-federal system that we operate. So this is a whole lot of problem, and then federal government, being the pace setter, must show the way by first, yes, increase your revenue, but reduce your cost. Increase your budget, but ensure that there is increment in capital spending over fiscal recurrent expenditure. Now, federal government has made an application, presented a request to National Assembly asking for $29.9 billion loan. That is almost equal to our 2020 budget. Our 2020 budget, as proposed, is about $35 billion. And then the realizable will not be up to 60%. That means you are looking at less than 20 billion. And federal government is asking for 29.9, almost $30 billion in loan. That tells you that even the domestic capacity, the national capacity to absorb that loan is lacking. And then it will more and more put Nigeria into more problem with the foreign debt that we had already exceeded. And then once that happens, we are going back to square one. Where the Egypt we have left before, we are going back to it. And that is not good for our economic calculation.
I wonder what your thoughts on the points that Barrister Nzaka has raised are, Mr. Wilcox.
Well, very surprisingly, I and Nzaka were agreeing on most of the issues this evening, except maybe with some little deviation. Is it the chicken before the egg or the egg before the chicken? Do we have to wait for federal government to... do we have to wait for federal government to increase revenue before service are rendered, or we felt the people should help the federal government and then get services? So whichever way it comes about, I think one thing that is critical here is the fact that Nigerians are realizing albeit a very long time, to have interest in the budget, and to continue to put it on government as to the fact that the budget needs better understanding and performance. I want to give credit to this administration that the amount proposed for capital is on the increase, even though we say because of paucity of funds it is not implemented. But we can be sure that increment has been there. Recurrent expenditure will always increase because there's always increase in cost. For instance, labor costs will always increase. We know of the recent adjustment in salaries of federal government workers, so that will always increase. But majority of the capital expenditure really is at the state level. That's one thing we must know. Federal government has limited infrastructures to maintain. Not as when I say limited, it's not as much compared to the aggregate of the states put together. That's why I discovered that in most state budgets.
That means I can now go and grab as many fresh bottles as I want for me and for my buddies.
Correct, guy.
Oh yes, relax and have fun with your friends as you stock your refrigerator this season. Fresh 400 ml on the go pack is no longer 250 naira. From now, with just 200 naira, you can buy the 400 ml on the go pack in the Fresh Mega Festive promo. Hurry!
Apart from the Fred said, overbloated road safety.
Offer valid while stocks last. Fresh fill up, keep going.
Looking for faster.
That needed to be streamlined. Federal government in terms of this.
Convert dollars to naira. ATM near me. Check. That fast.
Bill for your hustle by Oboh.
It's hard facts.
Mr. Wilcox, while you were talking, unfortunately, we were cut to ads. Apologies about that. And so a lot of the things that you said, we missed out on. But you agreed mostly with Barrister Nzako and then had a few notes that you had to add.
Yes, well, like I said, I agree mainly with what you say in terms of cost-cutting measures at the federal level. There are so many parastatals. Are you hearing me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Good. There are so many parastatals that are duplicated. If you go to Abuja, so many parastatals are duplicated. Commissions upon commissions that are duplicated and doing the same work. Some of this needs to be streamlined, I tell you, because most of them are none. Like for instance, now you just have one new commission, the Northeast Regional Commission. Yes, it's necessary, but this commission can easily be, their function can easily be subsumed into some of the established ministries. Now, that commission will have a whole gamut of bureaucracy, maintenance of staff, this and that can increase cost. But their function could have readily be taken over by Ministry of Works, Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Ministry of Health, some of the established ministries. But because everybody wants certain things to be in its own domain, we're establishing more universities. For instance, we just had a University of Transport in Daura. We have the University of Maritime University in Warri. So we'll keep duplicating some of these things, and every community wants some federal presence. Is it viable? So it also beholds on the people to also know that there are some of these things that are not necessary, but everybody just wants it for its own self, and then it makes the federal government budget to overbloat, all on recurrent. So we need to streamline that and know that the country needs to run efficiently. Funds are not available as it used to be. There's no free fund anywhere. So whatever naira that is accumulated by the government must be judiciously spent. And then area of corruption, which is the main bane. For me, that is 40% of the problem. If we rein in corruption to the level whereby there is value for money, there is accountability, high level of accountability and probity in governance, in government revenue and resources. I think some of these problems will have been a thing of the past. Roads will be built. A road that is built will last us long. Not the one that you build roads this year and next year you are still repairing that same road because of corruption. Health institutions that you build today, tomorrow it has dilapidated, you want to rebuild it. So these are things that need to be on the forefront. And I'm happy that everybody is taking interest in federal government budget, and we'll keep doing that. But we also must take interest in our state budget.
All right. Let me come to Aghogho now. This revenue thing that we're doing, we've seen the government hoping to increase VAT to 7.5%. They've also added a stamp duty of 50 naira on some POS transactions. You heard Barrister Nzako mention that. How much will these moves raise revenues and reduce the deficit, do you think, Ojugo?
Yeah. So I think in terms of the VAT, in terms of the additional moves to increase revenue, right? Or especially on this kind of non-oil revenue items, right? So around taxation, the question is still there because ultimately, from the finance bill, which proposes this 7.5% new VAT rate, we also see that several people have also been exempted. So really understanding what is going to be right from our tax revenue, from the increment of monies that will come from that increase, that 2.5, that additional 2.5 basis points on the 5% formally, versus actually what we subtract based on the incentives that are, pro-poor, pro-MSME. That is not fully clear. However, in terms of other areas for increase, we see also from the budget, from the proposed budget. Now we don't have the full breakdown from the approved budget, but we see in the proposed budget that against the 2019 budget, that there was a 35% increase in the 2020 proposed budget for federal government independent revenue, right, including revenue from GOEs. So on that front, right, when we're talking about that space, I think the level of revenue that we can get from them with the right incentives can actually move the needle quite a bit, right? Because you have a lot of allegations against certain GOEs that they are not remitting as much as they should, because legally they should remit after they've extracted their expenditure, right, and remit 50% of their surplus. So in terms of by the time that is incentivized, so that you make sure that you actually have those remitting what they should, I think the additional from that can be significant. Now again, speaking to revenue and budget realism, coming back to kind of this philosophical question of how do you, on the one hand, be realistic enough so that you don't end up not spending on what you should on key areas of spend, versus how do you make sure that you're giving aggressive targets so that you don't have certain agencies slacking, as it were. That is a question that will continue, I think, to remain as the government pushes for reform. But I mean, this is not a question you asked me, but outside of this revenue issue, I would also like to quickly make a comment on the issue of tracking.
Okay.
Because as you know, budgets, we are very much about civic engagement and encouraging accountability. Transparency is when you have the data. Accountability is when citizens are able to use that to demand action from their representatives, from the people in government that are there to serve them. And here, something very exciting, I don't know if you guys already discussed it, but something very exciting happened today, where the government actually made available on unveiled opentreasury.gov.ng, right? And I think this is definitely very much a step in the right direction, where now on an MDA level, on an MDA level, on a line item level, we'll be able to see what is actually the performance, what is the budget versus what is spent. Because a lot of times it's like, yes, we ask, okay, we know that 50% of capital releases have been released, censor this, censor that, you advocated for XYZ constituency projects, what's going on here, or we say ministry this, ministry that, this has been released, what is the status on this? But now, with the release of information from GIFMIS onto the opentreasury.gov.ng, we have there's even more potential for actually keeping track on a line-by-line item and asking more specific questions of these MDAs.
So I think this is just something I wanted to make sure that we highlighted today as we look forward to the 2020 budget being implemented. Because again, the budget is great, but the spending, that's where the push is.
Yes,
right?
indeed.
Spending and making sure that it's spent right.
And the spending is where I want to go next. Mr. Wilcox, we have seen again and again people talk about how spending is where the problem often arrives, right? How does government decide what to spend money on and what to not as far as the budget is concerned, right? We've seen, for instance, with the former Senate President Bukola Saraki, he was accused of padding the budget when he released the budget that was higher than what the president sent them. And we had this happen with this particular Senate as well. When we're talking about budget deficits, there's always two sides, the revenue, the spending. And we just saw that the Senate increased the size of the budget that the president sent to them. And like I said, in the past, when things like this will happen, would accuse the Senate president. In the most recent past, it was Bukola Saraki of padding the budget, right? Why have we not heard similar accusations this time, Mr. Wilcox?
Apparently, maybe people have learned something which I had always tried to teach people. There's not like budget padding. I don't know what they call budget padding. It's a nomenclature that just gains ground because people are looking for what to talk about. Any item in the budget, so long as that item is approved in the budget and signed by the president, it is the budget. So if anybody inserts any project into the budget, it can't be called budget padding. It's a project, and if the legislature passes such budget and then the executive append to it, then it becomes the budget. So that's not like padding. That's an English that people just took to take to the street, and Nigerians like the bad side of stories, the bad stories that they keep carrying along.
Barrister Nzako, do you agree that there's nothing like padding?
I'm not done. It is wrong. Let me go to it. It is wrong that when a president sends the budget to the National Assembly that they should increase it. I have always stand against it. If there is any concern they have about figures in the budget or projects that they have interest in and is not in the budget, it is for them to take it back to the executive that draws the budget and draw that says, look, we need this, we need this, we need this. And I believe that prior to the budget coming to the National Assembly, there should have been those requests or those concerns embedded into the budget. What I think happens most of the time, and it's not by the National Assembly alone, even by the executive, is overbloating the cost of services, goods and services. There is this tendency that goods and services are overbloated. I mean, it is only in Nigeria that sometimes a kilometer of road costs close to 1 billion naira to execute, which is what is provided in most of our budget, state, local government. So there is that increase, there is that undue increases in price of services that government undertakes. So that's what we should be looking at, not inserting of projects. That cannot be project padding. Then when the actual cost of executing a particular service or a particular project, it's so astronomically outrageous, then that's what we should be talking about, and that's what we should be looking at. Building a kilometer of road in Nigeria for close to 1 billion naira, for me, is criminal. And if something is not done about it, then we'll keep having this kind of big budget cycle and with little or nothing to show as delivery.
President Zako, do you think that NAS shouldn't change a budget after the president has sent it in? When you consider, of course, that in places like the US, the president and Congress negotiate budget before the president presents it.
To some extent, I agree with Lester that the word budget padding is a political mischievous statement used to harangue and discredit some leaders of National Assembly when it was under Saraki. You asked the question, why are they not talking about it? Because when it was under Saraki and Dogara, when they increased the budget amount, they were accused of padding the budget. But now the same amount has been increased by a whopping 260 almost 264 billion, and nobody is talking about padding because they really know. Those who talk about that padding know that there is nothing like padding. The budget is the budget. But what happens, like you asked, is in preparing the budget, there's always an interface between the legislature and the executive. That interface is important because legislature will approve, the executive will implement. So if there is no such interface at the point of preparing the budget, there will be issues of concordance and agreement. And that is where what you mentioned about United States, where the executive and the legislature negotiate budget. Yes, it is that interface at that point that the negotiation takes place. And once it is negotiated and there is a general agreement, because much as the three arms of government, especially the legislature and the executive, much as they are supposed to act independently, they are not in separate compartments because they are like Siamese twins inside the same womb, operating their own different lives. And that is the concept of separation of powers. It does not mean separation of government. So
Mr. Nzako, interestingly, you mentioned the increase in the budget size, which has happened with statutory transfers, which coincidentally includes the National Assembly's budget. Help us understand this bipartisan nature of this budget passage for the first one for the Ninth Assembly, whether it is artificial that you have, because I've heard people also argue on the one hand, this is an economic document, but also political in the sense that you have people from other parties, major parties and other parties that have agreed to sign this document. Whether it's an artificial bipartisanship or is it something that you think with the passage of time we will begin to see the true colors of this Ninth Assembly?
When you talk about the partisanship, you recall that the extra amount proposed by the House of Reps is different from that proposed by the Senate. But then between Senate and House of Reps, they form the National Assembly. And then they must sit at a joint committee of both chambers and harmonize whatever difference that there is between them before they now take it to Mr. President for his accent. And don't forget that even Mr. President, as the head of government and the head of the executive, can even return it back and say, no, I don't agree with this, I don't agree with that. But at that point, all those gray areas will be smoothened out. And once it is smoothened out and signed by the president, it becomes an act that should be implemented. Those are things, procedures that take place at the point of budget preparation, budget analysis, and the budget passing at National Assembly. Those are not the major problems. The major problems, like I earlier said, lies at the point of implementation of the budget. Now you ask, why is it that the current expenditure aspect of the budget is almost 80 to 90% implemented, but then the capital will now be about 15-20%? When you look at that average of when they say budget implementation, the average that hovers between 35-45% is essentially buoyed up by the almost excellent performance in terms of the recurrent expenses, and with very patchy low performance of the capital budget, of the capital outlay. And it is the capital outlay that jumpstarts the economy, that affects the life of everybody, that re-engineers the system, and then set the economy on the path of economic growth towards productivity and employment generation. So that is why we will not stop at agitating and asking that the table should turn. The capital budget outlay must be higher than the recurrent, or not a situation where the debt aspect, the debt servicing component is even higher than the capital component. It does not add up at all. And that is why this budget does not give that kind of hope that we expected. And then it has become a run-of-the-mill budget. We go in, we come out, nothing changes. Nigerians expect that there should be change. And if government, after this budget outlay, is asking for almost $30 billion loan, I wonder what they intend to do with that loan. And that means that at the end of the day, when assuming that loan is gotten, that means the budget will have to be rechanneled for a supplementary budget analysis that will capture this quantum large sum of money that is being requested by the federal government. But like I earlier said, in every environment, we must look at the capacity of the economy to absorb such loan vis-a-vis the decadence in our system and the decayed infrastructure that is supposed to carry this large chunk of money. If, for example, you want to put in a lot of money in energy, in power sector, whereas the transmission link is very weak. As we speak, the GENCOs, what they produce, cannot even go to the discos because of weak transmission link. And when we say that power is on the exclusive list, I say that is wrong, because if you look at the top schedule of our constitution, the power itself is on concurrent list. So governments at both state and federal level must look at this energy generation, because the idea of we generate power in Akwa Ibom, in Uyo, and transmit to Port Harcourt and the national grid, by the time it goes back to Uyo, a lot of it is lost. You generate power in Mambila, you transmit it to Enugu, along the way it is lost. And that is why the whole idea is we have to generate powers at pockets of a substation and then distribute within the jurisdiction of that area so that the leakages and the losses will be a lot minimized. These are policies and programs that will jumpstart the system and ensure that the economy is running well. The way and manner the budgeting system is done, like I earlier said, has not given any major paradigm shift in the system. And then I don't think we are going to see any much difference from this particular one. There is a 2.18 million barrels per day oil production. As we speak, what is the level? And then even when we produce more than this, the leakage is so much that the price of oil benchmark at $57 per barrel is not a bad one at all. But what happens is that the huge leakages in the system does not allow the realization of the expected earnings even from oil. The non-oil sector is coming up, but not as much as it is supposed to, because of the correspondingly increase in population that has left a yawning gap in the demand for government expenditure.
We'll have to leave it at that. Thank you very much, Fred Nzako.
Many thanks.
We also have had from Budget Ojuguche, as well as a financial expert, Alistair Wilcox, on the show. Thank you so much for your time.
It's always my pleasure. Anytime. Thank you for having me.
A pleasure as well.
Okay, and that's where we wrap up the show today. Quite the show, quite the conversation. It's always like this when we talk about the budget, because it's such an important conversation. And speaking of conversation,